This is the Self-Storage Podcast, where we share the knowledge and skills from the industry's leading investors, developers, and operators to help you launch and grow your self-storage business. I'm your host, Scott Myers, and over the past 16 years, we have acquired, developed, converted, and syndicated over 2 million square feet of self-storage nationwide with the help of my incredible team at selfstorageinvesting.com, who has helped thousands of people achieve greatness in self-storage. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Self-Storage Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Myers, and this week's guest is Brett Swarts and Jake Mellor. Brett and Jake specialize in helping people with a little-known reinvestment strategy called the Deferred Sales Trust. You see, 1031s and Delaware statutory trusts don't provide the flexibility needed or the ability to trigger the reinvestment of a deal's worth or even a lifetime's worth of accumulated wealth in a really structured and controlled way. And that's why the Deferred Sales Trust addresses the timing, control, payments, principal, cash flow, and diversity of asset classes that investors need. Brett is one of the few subject matter experts in this area, and along with his ace-in-the-hole associate, Jake Mellor, they have helped their clients defer hundreds of millions of dollars in tax and shaved off a priceless amount of energy and stress. So without further ado, please enjoy our incredibly valuable conversation on tax savings and strategy with Brett Swarts and Jake Mellor. Brett and Jake, welcome to the show.
Scott, thanks for having us.
Good to be here.
Well, I've given everyone a little bit of background on yourselves with the bios you sent over, but things have probably changed just a little bit since then. Why don't you fill in the gaps for us and then talk a little bit about what has been getting you excited and what you've been up to recently?
Yeah, so thanks, Scott, for having us on the show. So most, commercial real estate owners and high net worth individuals who are selling crypto or businesses, they struggle with capital gains tax. And so Jake and I focus on helping people defer that tax and make sense of their exit options, whether that be a 1031 exchange or something we like to focus on and help people with called a Deferred Sales Trust. And that gain is that tax is typically 30 to 50% of the gain. And so every day we're just assessing and looking at options for folks to help escape feeling trapped by the 1031 exchange and create and preserve more wealth. And Jake is an amazing financial advisor, securities professional, trains CPAs, and we have aligned strategically over this last couple years. And I'll let Jake tell a little bit about his story.
Yeah, so it's been a wonderful experience, and we help numerous individuals in the real estate industry do more with their money. Rather than selling and chopping up the proceeds to the various government agencies or taxing entities, and then reinvesting the difference, we're able to help them without using a 1031, roll it over into other assets that don't necessarily always have to be like kind. And it's been a wonderful experience. And as Brett mentioned, I had the amazing opportunity to work with CPAs and CPA firm owners across the country and helping them understand what tax-advantaged wealth management strategies would be best for their clients based on precedents, based on their circumstance, and various scenarios that they would pepper me with every week, right? In that process, I was able to meet the trustee of choice, who I consider to be Brett Swarts, who has done amazing things for a number of clients across the United States, specifically in some of the highest taxing states, such as California. And he's just a phenomenal individual and does really well at helping his clients navigate the tumultuous waters of today's taxation in regards to their investments.
Well, in our conversations that we've had leading up to this, and I wish we would have just hit the record button at that time, I've been thankful for some of the things that you have both shared, some strategies and a few items that, Jake, we just put into place right away. So feel free to send the invoice over if you would like. But I am probably the eternal optimist when it comes to just about anything in investing. And when something comes across my path that I think is just, how can that possibly be? Or a roadblock that it just seems abnormal or just illogical, I figured there has to be a way around it. And I know there's not a way around taxes, but there's certain things, many things in the tax code through the years that I was just like, why would anybody in their right mind put that in place, especially if it affects everyone, including the legislators, the folks that actually put it in place? And so, immediately I begin to think, well, I bet you there's some kind of workaround. And again, not using probably the best terminology, but there has to be a way that this doesn't apply to everybody, because the folks that put it into place, they're penalizing themselves. And so, I've been on a quest to continue to, find the folks that are very familiar with tax code, or just different ways of structuring things, different strategies, or even just different ways of looking at things. It doesn't have to be anything earth-shattering or a way around something, or a Lindy by installing another springboard and something that has such a heavy lift to it. So it's been refreshing and I've been at this for a number of years, been investing since 1993. Lo and behold, I run across Brett and Jake, and here we are. A handful of things right off the bat in our first conversations, and then also the DST, which I wasn't even familiar with. That wasn't on my radar. All that to say, let's talk a little bit about both of your approaches in terms of what you're looking at in terms of tax code, how you keep in front of that. And then what keeps you guys motivated and moving forward? And where are you finding these resources to be able to help folks like us and other folks that are just unaware of this from a strategy standpoint, from a tax code standpoint? Give us some insight into what's inside the recipe.
I'll start there. It comes from a story when I was at Marcus and Millichap, and this is 2006, Scott, and things were going really well. I mean, prices were sky high and the economy was roaring and things were going great. And then something happened that changed that whole industry, commercial real estate in particular, and real estate in a drastic way. And that was, kind of the 2008 economic crash. And it started to happen even before then, but we didn't kind of feel the effects, especially in commercial real estate between 2008 and 2011. And I was brand new at Marcus and Millichap, although I had grown up in the real estate industry, construction and business and 1031 exchanges, development with my family. But I was learning the brokerage side and the negotiation side and the underwriting side and the 1031 exchange side. And so like most commercial real estate entrepreneurs or brokers, you start out and you're not necessarily making a lot in the beginning, and then you get some momentum and you make some big bucks. But I came and I hit a wall in 2008, and I remember hitting this wall and looking around and seeing my clients hit a similar wall that they had overpaid via the 1031 exchange. And they had tried to force things that maybe didn't make as much sense at the time. But looking back, they would probably have paid the tax had they known what was going to happen. And so I saw friends, family, and clients lose half. Some lost everything because they had too much debt, not enough diversification, not enough liquidity, and they unfortunately had overpaid for the 1031 exchange. And so that's really where the pain of this starts. When I was in, I call it Taxafornia, a lot of people that got hurt. And so I'm at Marcus and Millichap trying to make sense of this. So I did what every good, I think, real estate wannabe does. You get a side hustle at a place to keep the lights on. And so my wife and baby at home trying to figure this thing out. I start working at a place called Cheesecake Factory. And so by day I'd make cold calls and negotiate with banks on behalf of my clients. And then by night I work at Cheesecake Factory. I did that for 2 years. And during this assessment, we said, what could we have done different to prevent this from ever happening again? And we identified that if we had not 1031 exchanged, perhaps we could have avoided some of this pain. And so my manager at the time brought in a gentleman to speak about the Deferred Sales Trust. And like most people learning about this in the commercial real estate industry, we thought we knew it all. We thought we were the ninjas of brokerage and 1031 exchanges. But he starts telling us about this thing, and I can't help but think of the analogy of Netflix. Like what he's saying is Netflix, and what we have is Blockbuster. I don't know if you remember, Scott, going to Blockbuster on a Friday night, maybe 10, 15 years ago, and you want that movie at the end of the aisle, but it's not there, or it's rented out, or even if you got it, you have to return it within 3 days. And if you didn't rewind it, you get a penalty. Well, that's like the 1031. The 1031 exchange, we got to define the problem here, does not solve the problem for a lot of investors, whether that's cryptocurrency, whether that's primary homeowners, whether that's business sales. Doesn't 1031, not 1031 eligible, stock, public or private, and or carried interest or GP interest when people are exiting large positions of properties. And so we found the Deferred Sales Trust as a solution for that. And it opened our eyes to what's possible. But like most people, they're very skeptical and cautious about it, which I'll pass it over to Jake, which leads into his part of the story. Jake, what are kind of your thoughts on what you like best about what we're doing and about the Deferred Sales Trust?
Well, to Scott's earlier comment, a lot of the legislatures know about these things. They're taking advantage of everything that possibly can. They know what's out there and what's available. Brett and my goal is to educate the rest of the community and help them know what they're taking advantage of and what other people are also taking advantage of. I served 8 years in the Army National Guard and 1 tour in Iraq. And the military is full of acronyms, right? So I use one here for what we do, and I call it DDE, Deferrals, Deductions, and Exemptions. And the Deferred Sales Trust is kind of the most flexible tool for deferring capital gains for the sale of any capital asset going forward. We have clients that are selling crypto and investing in real estate. We have clients that are selling real estate and are investing in the stock market. We have clients that are receiving stock options and stock warrants who are exercising those warrants within a deferred sales trust and then reinvesting in some other business. These things are all possible because of the Deferred Sales Trust and how we're helping these clients navigate these murky waters in CALA taxation, as Brett mentioned, or some of these other things, right? When the 1031 just wasn't the right thing, we don't need to be pushing clients as a square peg into a round hole. We like to sit down with them, understand their scenario, understand what their objectives are, to see first and foremost if they even qualify. Should they qualify? Is it the right tool for the job? And if it is the right tool, then let's make sure we get the right mechanics there to fix it up and make it work, right? My experience has been rather interesting through all of this. And I want to say that I'm just a normal guy that has had an extraordinary experience. And because of my experience, I've learned a lot. And I'd like to share all of that knowledge with more people because I feel rather blessed that I have it myself. And other people have circumstances that perhaps can benefit from it better than I can. Brett and I have had the phenomenal opportunity to meet with people who are doing deals and transactions from, the typical 500,000 range to 100 million range. And everybody's circumstance is a little bit different. Sometimes bringing in experts from other industries so that we understand fully their situation, more so than even the client does. And then what we understand incredibly well, which is the Deferred Sales Trust, we can see how that might be tailored to fit their scenario. And then when it makes sense, we bring in the tax attorneys to wrap it all up, put the little bow on it, and voila, we have a thing. And that's been a phenomenal experience over the last, Brett, how long has it been? Year and a half or so?
Yeah, we've been working together exclusively, but I started in 2009 with the Deferred Sales Trust and kind of bring it to full story. I was able to retire from the Cheesecake Factory as I rolled out the Deferred Sales Trust to my clients, helped to get an alternative to a 1031 exchange. And then the passion became, how do I communicate this to every single commercial real estate operator, syndicator? How do I communicate this to the cryptocurrency world now, the financial advising world? How do I coach them? Because I was a guy who didn't know anything, right? I didn't know what a Deferred Sales Trust was. And I was like, this seems too good to be true. I just knew 1031 exchanges because of the people that were teaching me that. But as I started to learn it, all of a sudden I looked up and passed them a bunch of referrals. They said, hey, Brett, you know this better just about anybody now. You spent the 10,000 hours with us over all these years. Why don't you roll it out? And I said, wow, I didn't know I was going to become a trustee. I was just a broker who happened to fall in love with the Deferred Sales Trust and what it could do for clients and solve problems. So at the end of the day, Scott, to answer your question, bring it a full circle, it's like in a Rubik's Cube. And sometimes people hand me this cube and all the colors are different colors on every edge. And I start to move it as much as I can, but my brain only goes so far. Then I pass it to someone even smarter like Jake, and he moves it a little bit more. And then we pass it to the tax attorneys, or that we call them the brain surgeons. And then typically they can make it pretty congruent on all sides. Not everything's perfect, right? The Deferred Sales Trust has this pros and cons to it. That's why you got to make sure we qualify. But our role is just to try to make it make sense, make it simple, and then see if it's a great fit. And then if it is, typically it can be transformational for people. I'm talking about saving failed 1031 exchanges. I'm talking about selling really high and then investing back into ground up development. For a client of mine, it's $2.6 million business sale he sold, and he's developing 70 multifamily units in Tennessee. Clients that sell these big primary homes that they felt trapped in. Clients that sold $5 million of Bitcoin that they bought for $50,000 and went to $50 million, and they were able to exit. And so once you kind of see the stories behind what people are doing, we just love to be a part of that story, if that makes sense, Scott.
It sure does. And that begs a few questions that I haven't asked of you yet. And then I'm assuming others do as well. And that is, I think most of the folks that are listening to this podcast are familiar with 1031 tax deferred exchanges. They've been through them, or at least have heard of them and understand the basic mechanics. So we don't have to go into a lot of detail on that. But on the front end, we all know that the best time to be thinking about your exit strategy on a particular project, a real estate investment, is when you're buying it. And that goes into how we structure it and, the timing of everything. And many people don't prepare for the exit as much as they should. So we've got a project that we're getting ready to embark upon, and we're not exactly sure what our exit strategy is yet. What are the considerations as to, should we be setting this up to exit using a 1031 tax deferred exchange or a DST? And then how do we approach those? What are those differences and how do we approach that?
Yeah, I'll start there and let Jake kind of fill in. So first thing is clarifying how and where you want your wealth invested, right? Not only your wealth, but your time and your energy, your stress, your location. I like to say the Deferred Sales Trust, there's a concept of, financial freedom, right? But there's also a concept of time, energy, and stress freedom. And then also it's called entrepreneurial freedom, where you have the ability to go back in and start business or buy business or buy real estate or invest in real estate at what's called optimal timing. So defining where it is that you want to be, and then defining the greater macro industry of what's going on right now. And I can't help but think of what happened in 05, 06, 07, and 08. Not that I think it's going to be a crash for real estate like 08 was to 2011, but looking at what happens if your wealth is to change, and is there a better way to diversify and get some liquidity? And in fact, there's a cool stat that I think your audience will appreciate. And in fact, it's known as the largest wealth transfer in the history of the planet. So the American Bankers Association, a bunch of others have done a bunch of studies, and it's estimated to be something around $32 trillion, Scott, that's going to pass from the baby boomers to the millennials in the next 20 years. And in fact, there's 10,000 baby boomers turning 65 every day. And there's about 77 million in the US alone. And 50% of the total net worth of America is tied to commercial real estate, private equity, which is businesses, and primary homes. And those are illiquid assets that have huge, huge appreciation. And so the question is, how is that 32 trillion going to transfer? Is it going to transfer in a tax efficient way or tax deferred way, or perhaps in a stepped up basis way, inside or outside the taxable estate? And so what we're in is a battle not only for individuals who are looking for some freedom with their taxes and their deferral and their wealth, but also the grand big scheme of things of where and how this wealth is going to be. And so part of what Jake and I are on is a mission to help keep the wealth in the entrepreneurs, in the owners, in those who have invested for all of these years, versus passing it over to a government that's just say not very efficient with the capital. But at the end of the day, this does help the government because it creates macroeconomic movement of the funds, which creates more jobs and more cash flow, more tax revenue. So it's actually really a good thing, which people got to be aware of as well. And so how do you determine if a 1031 is good? Well, first of all, 1031 only qualifies for investment real estate. So if you're not selling anything but investment real estate, you don't even qualify. So if you're selling crypto or primary home or a business or captive insurance or artwork or collectibles, a car or whatever, something that's like an exotic car, it doesn't qualify for a 1031. So 1031 is blockbuster because it only qualifies for investment real estate. Whereas the Deferred Sales Trust is Netflix because it qualifies for any asset. As long as $1 million net proceeds, $1 million gain, that's our minimum. So that's the first thing. Number two, if you can find a quality property that you want to buy, guess what? You don't pay us a dime. You just do that 1031. Congratulations. However, we can be a backup plan for a failed 1031. Make sure you're working with a qualified intermediary that will allow both options, not one, because there's those out there that don't want you to know about this. In fact, most commercial real estate brokers either A, don't know about it or don't want you to know about it because they want to keep you in the 1031 transaction cycle. 1031 exchange companies, some of them don't want you to know about this, right? Some of them, they all accommodate. So make sure you're working with those that will allow that. But if you can find a value add forced appreciation deal that makes sense on the cash on the upside of the deal, by all means buy it, but we'll be that backup plan. Jake, anything to add to that?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head in a really good way. I think I'll attack it a little bit from a different angle and help give some background information. 9/11 occurred. I was in school and the English teacher pulls it up on the TV and it's almost like, this can't even be real, right? But the type of community I was raised in, everybody pretty much joined the volunteer firefighters, the local police force, or the local National Guard, right? Anyway, so 2 weeks later, we all enlist, like a whole bunch of buddies. That's just kind of the type of community that I was raised in, the type of person that I am, right? Served my 8 years there. But being in the National Guard allows you to go to school and continue your education and everything else. I'm in my finance classes while simultaneously getting my securities license to handle assets in the market. And 2008 occurs, right? So another big, tremendous event. And my financial management teacher pulls the TV up. You've got people in Wall Street jumping out of windows. So, wow, this is the industry I'm going in, right? And again, we buckle down and we stay the course. There's a lot of other students who are shifting gears and saying, hey, I'm going to be a financial controller. I'm going to be doing all these other things. I'm going to stay away from the market, right? But what I've always found to be incredibly important is that when there is a crisis or when there is something insurmountable or when there is a big problem, you don't run away from it. You need to face it head on. You need to find a solution. And that's one of the great things about people such as Brett as a trustee is he's a solution guy. And that's why we probably align so very well. In regards to these highly appreciated assets that individuals are selling, a lot of times they're being forced solutions pre-made by other people like a 1031 that may or may not be the best fit. A 1031 can, under very certain circumstances, be the very best thing. But at the end of the day, in regards to your question, Scott, I'm finally coming around to this right now, is that people need options and they need control over their timing. What could be the very best thing? Well, shoot, if a 1031 works and it might be the very best, let's do it, but let's use a qualified intermediary that allows for other options like a DST, a Deferred Sales Trust. And let's be the backup plan in case timing doesn't work out. right? If you don't identify that next property within 45 days, and if you don't deploy those funds within the next, 180 days, and things, if you're selling in a high market, does that mean that you also have to buy in a high market, right? So if the Rubik's Cube doesn't align under the 1031, under real estate only transactions, under the like kind rules that were broadened in 2018, whatever, right? Let's look at what gives you the most control over timing. Should you receive the funds inside of the trust and you want to reinvest in real estate? Well, you can wait 2 years. There's no problem with that. In the meantime, we'll do what we call corporate management of your assets, invest them in marketable securities or other areas, so that until the opportunity of that next good deal comes along, we're doing something active with your assets. We're not just letting them lose purchasing power to inflation. There's a number of different things that we can employ to help you during that time. I had the great opportunity while I was in school during all of this calamity that was going on, while working full-time in school, typical American story, right? And I had a professor, Stephen D. Harrop, 24-time Lipper Award winner. What is that? A Lipper Award is, hey, you're a fund, and comparing yourself against all the other funds in your class and all the other managers who are managing those funds, who does the very best? And to receive that once in your career is a phenomenal thing. To receive it 24 out of 25 years of your career, I mean, there isn't anybody else like him. And he decided to retire and then teach school 2 days a week, whatever, right? And so I took classes from him. And he would literally say, today I'm taking my shirt off and I'm going to talk about the scars on my back, right? And he would share with us those experiences and how to react appropriately and how not to just follow the herd mentality, right? And so there were a lot of different things that I pull from mentors like Stephen D. Harrop to help clients today understand, are we reacting kind of like a knee-jerk reaction? Are we reacting to the hype? Are we being methodical? Are we being analytical? Are we really leaving the back door open should something not work out? Are we considering all of our options? And again, that goes back to the military acronyms, right? DDE, Deferral, Deduction, Exemption. Teeing yourself up with a deferred sales trust allows you to time when you do take your principal payments and might pay that tax in the future, that you can then set up other deductions so that your tax burden is less. And should it be available to you through a number of charitable giving strategies, what have you, we can also find some exemptions to where you don't have to pay that tax at all, which at the end of the day allows you to snowball your original investment. When I say snowball, instead of selling something and chopping it up to pay the various taxing entities, which, they have their own purposes, and I'm not arguing their validity or anything else. But if you feel like you could do more with your asset yourself in control of those funds, then let's retain those, let's defer those taxes, and let's reinvest with the bulk majority of your asset rather than net of taxes, just net of a few attorney fees. And, now you've got this financial tool that you can do any number of wonderful things with going forward as an entrepreneur, as an investor, as a business owner.
First of all, Jake, I was remiss when you mentioned it earlier. Thank you so much for your service to our country. I absolutely, on behalf of everybody listening, enjoy the freedom that we have in this country to go out and do what we do, to be entrepreneurs and to be in real estate or our chosen field. And that doesn't happen without the sacrifices that other folks have made, including yourself for your time. So I appreciate that.
Well, thank you for mentioning that, Scott.
So let's talk about the differences between 1031 and in a DST. Maybe, some of the restrictions in a 1031 from a syndicator standpoint. We all have to go forward together into another project. That is a limitation. The time constraints and the limitations in a 1031 versus some fewer constraints in a DST. So let's maybe break down 2 or 3 or maybe a handful of the differences, the pros and cons of using a 1031 versus a DST and the application of those.
Absolutely, Scott. And so the biggest one to understand is just the requirements of a 1031 exchange, right? So back to the blockbuster analogy, the first one is it has to be like-kind investment real estate. So it has to be investment real estate for investment real estate. It has to be within 45 days. That means as you close escrow, you have 45 days, as long as you put the funds with a qualified intermediary, to identify. Typically, most people pick 3-property rule. So you're identifying probably 3 properties. Then you need to close on 1, 2, or 3 of those within the 180 days from the close of escrow. Now it's got to be equal or greater value. So let's say if you sold for 10 million, you got to buy something for 10 million or more. And then if you had debt, it's got to be replacing equal or greater debt. So if you had 3 million of debt on the property that you sold, you got to replace that debt. Now the 1031 exchange is great for stepped up basis, by the way. It's still intact. And that means if you die and you pass away, your kids can inherit a stepped up basis, which they can then exit capital gains tax free. But what it's not great for is estate tax, which is one of the biggest reasons why you want to consider using a deferred sales trust. By the way, not to be confused with the Delaware statutory trust. These are both DSTs, okay? I like to call the Delaware 1031, it's kind of like the Hollywood video next to the Blockbuster 1031. It's all part of the 1031 family. Whereas the deferred sales trust, for those who are wondering what it is, by the way, it's based upon IRC 453. It's known as an installment sale that's coupled with a business trust. And it's the execution of these two things coming together with the trustee and the financial advisor, which is Jake, and the tax attorney who does legal work, which unlocks the power. For those who don't know what an installment sale is, it's kind of like a seller carryback, where if Scott had a $20 million self-storage facility, imagine he owned it free and clear, Joe down the street could put a down payment of $5 million and Scott could carry back $15 million. And that's called a seller carryback. Scott has become the bank and he can lend the funds back to the buyer on an installment basis, and he'll only going to pay tax on what he's received. The difference here is with the deferred sales trust is we're not going to actually finance anybody except for the trust, and that person Joe is going to come with the full cash, and therefore the funds are going to sit in a deferral state. And because of that, there's no like kind requirement. There's no 45-day identification. There's no 180-day close, right? There's no equal or greater debt, which, by the way, I think right now, being out of debt, having liquidity, having your powder dry, and being able to time the stock market, the cryptocurrency market, the real estate market, dollar cost average is a great way to hedge and protect and preserve your wealth. And there's some of the all-time highs in the stock market, in the cryptocurrency market, and the real estate market. Now is a great time to be a seller. And so you can sell, pay off debt, diversify, get liquidity, and then just be patient and let time and dollar cost averaging help you to execute a good, solid wealth plan. The next thing to do, I think you mentioned, Scott, is or to consider for the deferred sales trust is in a typical 1031 exchange or a commercial real estate syndication, the whole entity must move. So what does that mean? Well, that means if Scott, me, and 50 other investors are in one entity, and this entity is going to sell, typically the whole entity, meaning all the investors, must agree. Like Blockbuster, we must go into the 1031 and we must exit into the next deal to perfect that. Whereas the deferred sales trust, we can separate. In fact, I had a client, they sold a $20 million multifamily syndication. They had a bunch of LPs and they were two GPs, and they exited out of Las Vegas, this multifamily property, to each of their own deferred sales trusts. So if Scott's a GP and Scott even has LPs or other GPs, they each can have their own deferred sales trust as long as it's a $1 million net proceeds, $1 million gain. It's big enough. And then they can sell and everyone else can pay their tax. Then the next deal, they did another one, a $16 million deal. That one was in Phoenix, Arizona. And they added the funds to the same exact trust. So now they can consolidate it, two parts of equity that they would have paid some tax on. Then they did a third one and they're doing a fourth one. And each time, the whole entity doesn't have to move. In other words, they can sell and they can defer their tax and the rest of the folks can pay their tax. So I'll pause there, Scott, making sure that makes any sense to you there, or any questions on that?
No questions on this end. We talked about one of the requirements being $1 million that is going to be essentially carried forward, or either carried forward in the sense of a 1031 or in a deferred sales trust going into the trust. What are some of the other caveats or requirements in order to establish and have those funds go into a deferred sales trust?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's critical and very important that things are set up before the sale. So not only an eligible transaction, but that we're in front of it. Typically, we like to know 30, 60, 90 days out that there's going to be a possible transaction, and the attorneys can provide some language so that it all goes into the contract, and then we're showing intent from early on. This isn't a last-ditch strategy for tax reasons, but this is true intent. And then, of course, the overall objective, which maybe is the thing that we should look at first. What is your objective with the proceeds of the sale? Is it to reinvest? Or is it just to take it personally and go do personal things, right? We shouldn't go buy that next Lamborghini or the Ferrari or, something personal in nature unless you have a car rental business that you're renting it out for, right? That's one of the overall things that we need to focus on from the very beginning is, Are we working with entrepreneurs, business individuals, investors who want to continue to invest? And again, this might still work if they just want to this is their last transaction. They want to sell off into the sunset. And because of how this can work, it might be a more tax efficient thing over time. But if they just want to take all the funds now, it's not a good fit. If they want to take all the funds personally and do just personal things with it, it's not a good fit.
The self-storage industry has been one of the last frontiers in commercial real estate to consolidate. We're not consolidated at the level of, say, multifamily or hospitality or medical office buildings. And there's still a lot of individual, as we call in the industry, mom and pop owners, single facility owners out there. And with all eyeballs on the self-storage industry now, because of its performance over the past couple of decades, there's a whole lot of folks coming into the space now. So larger players, regional players, national players, funds are being created. Some of the other hedge funds are getting into the business. Private REITs, public REITs have been very active recently. And so there's this incredible race to consolidate. I recently wrote an article for Inside Self Storage Magazine, and my presentation is going to be on just that, because we're seeing it at an alarming rate in our industry. And that's including the smaller investor who's just building up a portfolio of 2, 3, 4, 5 facilities. When they exit, because there are these bigger players that are looking to gobble them up at, say 50, 60 basis points higher just because it's a portfolio, there's a lot of individual assets being sold off as part of a portfolio sale. So you probably know where I'm heading with this, and that is if the aggregate of the profit, let's just say I bought individual single entity, single asset entity LLCs established with multiple self-storage facilities. Maybe some are syndicated and some aren't, and we all exit, sell 4, 5, 6, 7 properties. My aggregate is $1 million profit, but it was coming from the multiple sales. Does that qualify? Am I able to take the proceeds from that one sale and put that into a deferred sales trust? Please tell me yes.
We found, Scott. So the answer is yes. However, the question is the ROI doesn't make sense. So, and generally, we found that it's like this, Scott. So for every single transaction, we like to see 1 million net proceeds and $1 million gain, unless you have let's say two LP positions, for example, or one GP, one LP, or even 2 assets, some cryptocurrency, a business, and some real estate, but 2 assets that combined at $500,000 each of gain and net proceeds to add up to the million. And the reason is like scale. Like you probably wouldn't buy a 10-unit self-storage facility, right? It wouldn't make sense, right? Now, potentially you might buy that 10-unit self-storage facility. It was next to your 300-unit self-storage facility, right? And there's some scale there. That's the whole idea here too. With our fees, and what are the fees? We can go over that here as well. It's 1.5% of the gross sales price. So let's say it's $1 million net sales price, gross sales price on an asset. It'd be $15,000 to the tax year. That's a one-time fee. And then Jake and I combined are somewhere around 1.85 to 2% on a recurring basis, depending on the AUM. So say it's $1 million there, it's about $20,000 a year, depending on how and where the funds are invested. If it gets higher, there's some fee breaks as well as you get higher and higher and higher on the AUM. And so we just like to make sense. It's got to be a winner for you. And then, by the way, sometimes there's base hits, there's doubles, there's triples, there's home runs, right? Or a scale of 1 to 10. We found that it's a 10 out of 10 home run at $1 million and $1 million. Okay. We have a client right now, Jake and I are working with, they have 2 million of cryptocurrency. They have 40 different coins. Well, in cryptocurrency, you can push a button and the transaction cost is 0, really. I mean, you're just pushing it, right? Whereas if it's a real estate deal and you have 30 properties or 40 single family homes and it equals 2 million, it's not a good fit for us because the transaction cost is going to be too expensive. Does that make sense, Scott?
Yep, absolutely. 100%. That's what I was looking at. So it sounds like at the end of the day, it is case specific, deal specific, and every person's tax situation, specific and what they're doing forward. So all the more reason why they need to get in touch with you too. And that's the reason why we had you on here as well. So with that, we're clearly heading towards part 2, or at the very least, having you guys back up very soon, but coming to the end of our time here. So let's do this. First of all, what is the best way to get in touch with either one of you to have a further discussion, as I'm sure many people would like to have?
Sure. We have different business entities or separate businesses, even though our businesses partner to assist our clients. We do that for regulation and legal purposes. I have an 800 number where I can be reached, 1-800-773-1848, as well as on my website, you can book an appointment, and the website is strategictaxsolutions.com.
Perfect. And then you can check out my company, Capital Gains Tax Solutions, by checking out our YouTube channel, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and or just go into our website, capitalgainstaxsolutions.com. By the way, I want to plug our new book here that Mr. Jake Mellor will be in the book. And so it's called Building a Tax-Deferred Exit Strategy. And it's a proven playbook for unlocking your ideal wealth plan when selling any assets of any kind for yourself or your clients. We also have a guy named Kevin Harrington from Shark Tank. So if you've seen that show, he's in the book, and some other really smart people. They say to get in books or get in rooms with people that are smarter than you. So I got Jake in the room, and I got Kevin Harrington, and I'm in the book too. So it's pretty cool. So check that out. It's hitting Amazon here really soon.
Awesome. Well, gentlemen, as we leave here, speaking of books, let's start with you, Brett. Tell us maybe the book that you have either gifted the most or the one that has had the most impact on you. And Jake, we'll let you follow up with the same.
Yeah, so it's a book by Jim Rohn, and it's called The Seasons of Life, okay? Mm-hmm. And what's really neat about this book is it goes through spring, summer, fall, winter, and it talks about all of the seasons that we have with our health, our finances, our faith, our relationships, our businesses, and understanding that things go through seasons. And it's always a great perspective. It's actually a pretty short read, but it's a book that's really rich and full of encouragement, of conviction, of passion. And so I highly encourage you to read The Seasons of Life by Jim Rohn, R-O-H-N.
The world is a better place as a result of Jim Rohn being in it. He has shaped, much of the way that I think about a lot of things, and one of which is in the springtime. He gives us all permission to take the weeds out of the garden, which I'm sure you remember, Brett. The naysayers, the people around you that are quashing your dreams and trying to keep you down because it makes them feel worse about themselves to see the friends in our circle succeeding or surpassing them. And sometimes it's okay to quit your friends. And that was so freeing for me, and has been over the years, to recognize that that combined with you are the sum total of 5 people you spend the most time with. Maybe time to take some of the weeds out of the garden. So absolutely. Love me some Jim Rohn. Jake, how about you?
Absolutely. So, all kinds of books come to mind, As a Man Thinketh, and all of these other books that are just incredibly profound. But the most recent book that I've gifted actually was for a client who has a media company that works with celebrities and musicians and artists, gets them on the top 100 charts, all of these other things, right? And I sent him 2 books. There's The Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen, as well as The Innovator's Solution. And The Innovator's Solution was primarily the book that was sending to him because, in essence, he's a disruptor in the classroom. That's another one of Clayton's books, right? Disruption in the classroom. But he's a disruptor and he's an innovator, and he's really changed things in the marketing media industry, and he's not done. And so I sent him that as a little bit of encouragement to help him continue down his path and to make great things happen.
Fantastic. Also an excellent author. I have the dilemma, and I have not gotten all the way through it. Like books I start, and they're strategically placed around the house and other places. And one of these days I will pick that one up and finish it. All great information and great recommends as well. So gentlemen, we will have you back for round 2. Appreciate your time. A more lengthy time on our podcast today, but that is because we had both of you giving just some incredible value. So appreciate both of you, and looking forward to not only having you back, but also being in the same room with you two very soon. So thanks, guys. Have a great day. We'll talk to you very soon. Hey gang, wait, 3 things before you leave. First, don't forget to subscribe to the Self Storage Podcast and turn on your notifications so you never miss another episode. And while you're there, please leave us a 5-star review if you like the show. Second, be sure to share your favorite episodes and more via Instagram, and don't forget to tag us. And lastly, head to the links in the show description and hit the follow and subscribe button on Twitter and Facebook to get a front row seat as we grow and scale our business and bring you along with us. Take care.